Now that you have your day-old chicks, how do you care for them? We'll let you know coming up next. We recently had 200-day-old chicks delivered to the farm. Now we're going to let you know how we keep these chicks happy, healthy, and thriving.
Woke up this morning and it was 27 degrees. And it snowed again. Melted off the previous day and snowed right back again. Not a great second day of brooding season. So we ran a heater, portable heater, through the night. This is the type of heater that will auto shut off if the oxygen gets too low. As you can see, the ambient temp is currently 65 degrees in the garage. And underneath the brooder, we have a temperature of 95 degrees, which is perfect. Hourly, we will fill and top off the feeders. Again, this is starter grower, 21%. Here you see I am picking through the food to get rid of any shavings, wood shavings, or any poop or anything that might have gotten in the feed, and then top off that feeder. Again, in this feeder, they've kicked a few shavings in there. When they're small like this, they don't tend to kick shavings too often, but the larger they get, the more shavings they'll kick into the feeders, and the more often you'll have to clear them out. They will not eat the feed if the feed's covered with shavings. So as they get bigger, I tend to put 2x4s underneath the feeders to raise them as they grow. And that helps or keeps them from kicking sawdust into that feeder. More important than the feeders is to keep the water clean and clear. As you can see, I sometimes, if it's cold, will place a water underneath the brooder box. What this does is it keeps the water warm, if not hot. But doing so also breeds bacteria, so you have to make sure that you periodically clean this water, or if not all of them, every few hours. You can actually smell the water in that feeder after a few hours, so definitely that heat helps the bacteria breed. I'm using some Dawn liquid soap on a sponge to scrub these waterers inside and out, and again, I do this every few hours. It is very important that these birds have bacteria-free water. With them kicking around sawdust and everything, all kinds of things get in that water and make it filthy really quick. So it's something that you need to check off it. Now when I go to fill this water, I make sure that the water is warm, slightly warm to the touch, because if you fill these with cold water, it will shock the birds. The birds are, barely a few ounces in weight, and so they drink a little bit of water, it'll bring their body temperature down. So make sure you warm that water up before you give it to them. Yes, it will cool off to room temperature, and that's okay, but start with the water slightly warm. I'll also add some probiotic to the waters after the second day. Right now we are actually using electrolyte. And that electrolyte it's got some salts in it and will cause these birds to drink more than they usually will. And this will help them hydrate because after being shipped for a day and going through that stress, they're going to be slightly dehydrated, if not highly dehydrated. Again, placing that water underneath that brooder is going to heat that water and keep it warm. And I'm doing that only because the ambient temp in the garage is dropping from 60 to 40 daily, and it's 27 degrees outside. After you feed and water the birds, it's important that you inspect the birds. As you can see inside of here, this behavior, they're actually running from the heat. So this tells me that the brooder's running too hot, and they would like it a little cooler. They don't, as you can see, the middle's cleared out and they're hanging around on the sides. If they were cold, they would bunch up in the middle, and you know, so you need to go ahead and do something about it. In this case, I would recommend that you raise the brooder up. So you want to also inspect for any dead birds or any sick birds or any strange behavior. You will also want to look for any birds with pasty bottom, as that is a fatal condition. All right. Here's a up close and personal shot of what pasty butt looks like. Their vent gets clogged due to either excessive heat or excessive cold, or they could be dehydrated. So what you need to do is you need to run some warm water, a little bit warmer than your body temperature, and soak its bottom and kind of massage the poop away from its vent and get it as clean as you can. Now you don't want to get the chicks soaking wet. You want to just get the vent wet and remove all that you can. A lot of folks will say to coat their vents with vegetable oil when this happens, but I don't like to use any external chemicals, or even though it's vegetable oil, the chicks will peck at it and ingest it, and that's not going to be good for their digestive system. Be sure to dry the bird thoroughly so it doesn't get a chill before it gets placed back in the brooder. So this is how you raise the brooder. I have placed it on 2x4s to make a bigger air gap underneath. This will allow more airflow and will cause the temperature to drop slightly. Last but not least, you're going to need to clean out your brooder every few days. Depending on the number of birds you have, it's going to depend on how often you're going to need to clean it out. In our case, we can probably get by with about 3 days. I would suggest not going any longer than 5, and use the smell test. If you can smell the birds, you need to clean out your brooder. The brooder should always smell of fresh pine shavings. Another note, speaking of pine shavings, never use any aromatic type shavings such as cedar. Cedar has a high content of sap, and that sap is very fragrant, and that's not good for the bird's respiratory system. So stay away from any cedar. Use pine, and you'll find that you will also need to use large flakes or medium flakes. Never use fine flakes. The chicks will eat the fine flakes, and that will impact their crop and will eventually cause them to die. After we have gotten everything cleaned out, we then start applying new fresh shavings. In this case, we're going to use a bale and a half. You do not want your shavings to be too deep. Again, the chicks can suffocate in very deep shavings. They can't climb out of it. They'll also pile, and the poor chick on the bottom will suffocate down into the shavings. So I recommend, an inch and a half to 2 inch maximum on your shaving depth. Keep it thin while they're young, and then you can bring it thicker as they grow older. They'll have more strength to climb out of it. As you see at the very end here, we are basically shooing the birds back under the brooder. They're in a massive pile, which is not good. You do not want your birds to be piled for very long. Again, that will cause suffocation. The birds on the bottom will be crushed. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe so you can be notified when the next video comes out.